I think you put Barkley squarely in the MVP conversation. All right, welcome into the Breer Report for November the 15th. Week 11 is underway. I am in Philadelphia. I was at the game last night. And where I want to kick this off is with an appreciation for the Eagles head coach. That sort of thing seems to be in short supply in this city. And I think we need to take a look at Nick Sirianni, the job that he's done, not only over the course of this year, but over the course of the last 4 years in Philly. And, it's interesting. I don't think there are very many coaches that would have been in the hot seat, coming into a year the way that Nick Sirianni was coming into the year this year. He inherited a 4-win team. Now, he's more talented than that, but he inherited a team that had won 4 games in the COVID year of 2020. He made the playoffs in his first year, finished that season real hot. They won a playoff game. Then in year 2, he takes the Eagles all the way to the Super Bowl. They were the best team in the NFC all year long, on the doorstep of a world championship. And then in 2023, they make the playoffs again. Now, they collapsed down the stretch, which is one of the reasons why his job security was in question. But, really, you look at the totality of it. There are very few places other than this one where a coach would make the playoffs in his first 3 years, a first-time head coach would make the playoffs in his first 3 years after having inherited a 4-win team, would have a Super Bowl on his resume, and would come into the season with arguably the hottest seat in the entire league. That talk is gone now. The Eagles are now 8-2. After starting 2-2, they've won 6 in a row. And I think a lot of it is due to how Sirianni has handled his team. And after 4 games, he really asked that his players and his coaches reflect on where they were at 2-2, all the things that had gone wrong. There was a lot of change in the organization. They not only had new coordinators on both sides of the ball, they had new coordinators coming from outside the organization. It was the second straight year they had 2 new coordinators. But the year before, one of the 2 coordinators had come from the inside. In this case, you had 2 guys with a lot of experience coming in Kellen Moore on offense and Vic Fangio on defense. So you had to meld what those guys did, what those guys believe, with what you already had established. So that was, an open question. And then there was a leadership void that had to be filled with Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox retiring. Both those guys were Eagles for over a decade, a huge part of 2 Super Bowl teams and a huge part of everything that had been built over the previous decade plus here in Philadelphia. So a ton of transition. They go through that 2-2 start. They get to the bye. And Nick Sirianni really wanted his players, his coaches to reflect on everything. And I think that did a lot of people a lot of good, and nobody more so than Jalen Hurts and Kellen Moore, who went back and reviewed over 2 years of Hurts's tape, tried to figure out, okay, what's the best way out of this? What's the best way forward where we can meld Kellen Moore's system with what Hurts does well? What they figured out was our strength right now is Saquon Barkley and the run game. Let's lean into that. Let's lean into play action off of that. And the results have really followed. The first 4 games, in each of the first 4 games, Jalen Hurts had a passer rating in the 80s. In the 6 games since, 5 of those 6, at least, he had a 115 or better passer rating. I hadn't seen the passer rating for last night, but he was good enough last night, plenty good enough last night after a little bit of a slow start. And I think you put Barkley squarely in the MVP conversation now, too. He had 198 scrimmage yards on 28 touches. He has been a major factor all the way through for the Eagles. And the Eagles deserve credit for sort of zigging when everybody else was zagging. I think there were a lot of people who, know the Eagles organization who doubted that they would pay a veteran running back. But what the Eagles looked at was the impact that Saquon Barkley could have on the team, the feeling Saquon Barkley gave them playing against him when he was on the Giants, and then also where the market is. And, somebody there told me this week, what we paid for Saquon Barkley was roughly the equivalent of what Atlanta paid for Darnell Mooney on the free agent market. Now, Darnell Mooney's done a really good job. I'm not denigrating him at all, but you're talking about a guy who's coming in as a complementary piece to what the Falcons are doing versus a guy who's going to touch the ball 300 times in Saquon Barkley. And Barkley's proven to be even more valuable than they had thought because they had the receiver injuries earlier in the year with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith battling through stuff. It really allowed them to build an offense around Saquon Barkley, build a passing game around Saquon Barkley, and that so much of what they're doing is off of play action now. And I don't even think they played their best last night, but you see the offense coming along. The defense is playing great under Vic Fangio. I think the two rookie defensive backs, Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, have made a huge difference for them. This is an Eagles team that's in really good shape going into the stretch drive at 8-2 and in full command of the NFC East. Doesn't take nothing away from the Commanders. I thought their play style showed up early in that game. The talent gap showed up later in the game, where you saw the Eagles sort of impose their will on the Commanders. And now the Eagles, go into late November as the clear favorite to win the NFC East. Our second topic for today is where the Chiefs are going into this Bills game. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the Chiefs offense looks like, because I think you had one vision for what the Chiefs were going to be at the beginning of the year, and now you have another vision for what they're going to be going forward. At the beginning of the year, they were really excited about where they could go with the offensive talent they had brought in. And the idea was to have Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on the outside, running downfield, pulling safeties with them, and then having space underneath for Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice to operate. Things have changed with injuries. Rashee Rice is definitely out for the year, and it looks like Hollywood Brown's going to be out for the year. There's a small chance he comes back in the playoffs, but in all likelihood, he's out for the year. So they've had to reconfigure who they are offensively. Bringing back Juju Smith-Schuster is a part of that. Trading for DeAndre Hopkins is another part of it. And again, it's going to be interesting to see where they are on Sunday with all of this, because they've had some time now to conjure up what this is going to look like without having Juju and Hopkins out there together yet. My understanding is they fully expect Juju Smith-Schuster to make his return on Sunday in Buffalo against the Bills. And what's interesting about it to me is that Juju and Hop, at this stage of their career, probably both best utilized as inside weapons. And that's something the front office knew when they were looking at trading for Hop. They went to the coaching staff, asked, hey, can we use these guys together? Is there going to be an opportunity to get these guys on the field at the same time? The coaching staff answered that absolutely, we can do that. And over the course of the last few days in practice, they've worked both those guys inside and outside. They plan on moving those guys around a bunch. And both those guys, because they have high football IQ, already have the trust of Patrick Mahomes. So again, it'll be interesting to see how the vision for the Chiefs offense, which has changed a bunch, how that looks with Juju and Hop out there. Obviously, keeping them healthy is going to be a big part of this as well. On the downside, doesn't look like they're going to have Isaiah Pacheco out there on Sunday. Probably take another week for him. And obviously Harrison Butker now on injured reserve. He'll be out for at least a month. Finally, our third topic, a real statistical anomaly here with one of the games that I'm most excited for, because it does feel like we've got an old school Ravens Steelers game coming on Sunday. And I'll give my producer Kemp Brown credit for this. He pointed out to me that Lamar Jackson is 1-3 against the Steelers in his career. And my first thought was there's no way he's only played them 4 times, but it's true because of injuries and because twice they played in week 17 and Lamar was sitting out because the Ravens had already locked up the number 1 seed. That was the case last year. That was the case, I believe, in 2019. He didn't play in those games, so he's missed a whole bunch of games in the rivalry, in the Steelers-Ravens rivalry, because of injury. There was 1 year because of COVID. In 2018, it was because he wasn't the starter yet when the Steelers played the Ravens. So it's just a really interesting dynamic here where Lamar hasn't played in big Steelers-Ravens games quite as much as you would have thought because of all of those circumstances, and he hasn't played well against the Steelers either. They're the one team that has more interceptions than touchdown passes allowed against Lamar Jackson. So it'll be really interesting to see Lamar up against that Steelers team. And this is a different version of Lamar Jackson. This is a version of Lamar Jackson that's capable of doing more at the line of scrimmage, that has more command of the offense, that's doing more in the passing game, that's running to running to throw a bunch more than he has in the past. And I think, again, this is something I pointed out, I believe, last week right here on the Breer Report, that there was a game a couple weeks ago where he had 3 yards rushing and had a perfect passer rating. And I don't think that sort of thing is happening 4 and 5 years ago. But here we are, and this is a different version of the Ravens offense. When you talk about most valuable player, he ran away with the most valuable player vote in our midseason exec awards last week. And the reason why is because this year he's really defined that word, value. 3 new offensive linemen, 60% of their offensive line from the AFC title game has turned over. A lot of experience, Morgan Moses, John Simpson, Kevin Zeitler going out the door. They're able to replace those guys effectively over the course of the last half season. The defense hasn't played as well. Losing Patrick Queen, having younger edge players, having a new defensive coordinator in Zach Orr. And the reason they've been able to ride that out and remain at the top of the AFC and remain in the race, to have one of the top seeds in the AFC and win the AFC North is because of Lamar Jackson. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does in this spot. Again, not a ton of experience in a weird way because he just hasn't played the Steelers a lot over the course of now his 7 years in the NFL. Really excited for this one. And this is a Steelers team that comes in and seems to be playing just in a different level than the last few Steelers teams has. I think you saw it at the end of the game on Sunday, how they're able to make those timely plays. Russell Wilson's throw, which was sort of drawn up in the dirt to Mike Williams at the end of that game against the Commanders. And then the stop that DeMonte Casey and, of course, Minkah Fitzpatrick were able to make on Zach Ertz to turn the ball over on downs. The Steelers team comes in like really having like just a knack and an ability to know what it's going to take to win at the end of these games. Seeing that Steelers group against Lamar Jackson is going to be awesome. Again, we got some great games coming this weekend. Even the Sunday nighter is really good with the Bengals and Chargers both in a critical spot. But that Steelers-Ravens game, top of the list for me. Chiefs-Bills, the Chiefs can more or less salt away home field advantage in the AFC if they can go into Buffalo and win. Lots of big things coming this weekend. We will be back here on Tuesday in the Breer Report to wrap all of it up for you. Enjoy Week 11, everyone.